Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop a sub, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Giuseppe, welcome back to the World XP podcast, man. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me back. It's been almost a year to the date. Well, maybe a little bit on,
Yeah, so last time you were here, you were in the middle of running for DC City Council. For those listening, do you want to do a quick who you are and how you got here before we jump into it?
Yeah, sure. No problem. My name is Giuseppe Niosi. Last year I ran for DC Council at Large, which is DC is obviously scattered into 8 wards, and so the at-large representative kind of is a little bit more of the flux for all the other wards. But I was running specifically as a minority candidate, or a Republican in DC, which is very uncommon. But I could explain maybe why the methodology was there to begin with. But obviously I didn't win. Had a lot of fun, a lot of lessons learned, and I'm looking forward to maybe having a re-election in a year or two.
Very nice. So one of the reasons that we got together is the Republican primary presidential debate was last night at time of recording. So when this goes out, it'll be slightly dated, but not so much. I think the third debate is in like a month or so. So definitely
it's
out
okay.
before
Everyone's
that.
already doing their reaction videos to it.
Yeah,
So
of course. If you didn't get it out today, then you're late anyways. But
yeah, right.
So the first debate, I think, went well. I don't even know. The first debate I thought was a little bit interesting, and then the one last night was, I guess, devolved into just. I think the way I heard it described was children yelling at each other.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Republican primary as a whole? Obviously, Trump hasn't been at either of the debates. We've got some new players. Vivek obviously has been kind of creating some shockwaves. Some of the older, more establishment types, Mike Pence, etc., have been around. What are your thoughts right now on the primary?
Well, so that's a lot to unpack, and I guess I'll take it step by step. What a lot of people are saying is that these debates are merely just running for second place because Donald Trump already has, the polling numbers that prove that he's, pending anything drastic happening, he's probably going to be the Republican nominee. But I think it's still safe to say that, the fact that he does have 4 indictments happening, all simultaneously, it's reasonable to understand that there are other people that need to be able to step up if the time comes when Donald Trump might not actually be the nominee. Or it's also good to know the kind of the sway of where the Republican voters are going anyway, because Donald Trump's going to inevitably have to have a vice president, and someone on that the debate stage might as well be his vice president, depending on how they're polling. And to your point, I did watch the first debate. I thought that everyone handled themselves very cordially, maybe a little bit timid at times, but it was still a very good decorum for the. I mean, personally, I don't really like the modern day or the, I guess it's more antiquated debate style. I do think that long form discussion is probably where people are more engaged and trending towards. Obviously you would maybe see that with like the Joe Rogan podcast, for example, where he has these guests on that you could listen to, Bernie Sanders or Andrew Yang for 2 hours straight, kind of go over their sort of idea for the presidency. This is dating back a couple of years ago, but I do think that that's really where we should be going. However, with these, everyone gets their 2-minute sample or sound sample, doesn't really help perpetuate kind of the way the Republican Party is going in a way that I think it's enticing to younger voters. But this most recent debate, I did think that it kind of devolved into a little bit of a shouting match, and I think people who might be grasping at the remnants of a couple polling numbers need to really make attacks. I mean, the famous one was a couple of years ago when Tulsi Gabbard really took down Kamala Harris in the debate.
She torpedoed that campaign. That was crazy.
Yeah, you haven't really seen that yet. I mean, I think Tim Scott was trying to do that with Nikki Haley to no avail. I do think that the winners of this debate were probably DeSantis, Haley, and Vivek Ramaswamy again. Pretty much everyone else is. I don't see them going far, to be honest with you.
Somebody who interests me is Doug Burgum, because he seems like a very reasonable person who also has got right? He's got some experience in politics, but not too much that I'm like, he's part of the thing. Um, but he doesn't have he just feels like he doesn't have uh like in a vacuum, if you just put all of them lined up, like he would probably be somebody that I would very strongly consider. Um, but
It's interesting
he's
that you say that because, I mean, to my knowledge, he's the governor of one of the Dakotas, North
North
Dakota.
Dakota, yeah.
And I think he actually is a businessman himself,
Yeah.
so he has a lot of similarities maybe to Donald Trump. And you're right. I mean, some of the things that he was saying weren't exactly far-fetched ideas or anything like that. He just doesn't really have the chutzpah or star power the way that someone like Nikki Haley or Vivek Ramaswamy, who's kind of like starting to build this sort of personality. Yeah, I almost think that he he's a little bit distracting on stage. Just where he's a little bit monotone and not really
Yeah.
willing to get in the
Yeah.
dirt with some of the people, which is, I mean, unfortunately how politics has evolved to in recent days.
Yeah, 100%. I also Vivek has been interesting to me because he has been on every podcast under the sun, I think, except for Rogan. Like I've heard him in long form interview
Multiple times.
four or five times, like listen to the whole thing four or five times, and then I've seen countless others where he's not been on, and it's been with people that are super different. Like he went on Sean, you know who Sean Ryan is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Sean Ryan is I think he was a Navy SEAL or a special operator for the military, and then he was on that one for like 3 hours. Then he's on Jordan
Mm-hmm.
Peterson, who's a psychologist from Canada. Like not the same host at all. Both
Well,
2 or
he's
three
also
hour
been
discussions.
he's also one of the few candidates that have gone into what would be enemy territory like
Yep.
CNN or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and stood his ground there. I mean, I think that um, I kind of associate Vivek Ramaswamy to be sort of the Andrew Yang of this election cycle, in
Mm,
the sense that he has a lot of sort of very unique ideas. He's young. He's definitely trying to adhere to a younger crowd to get them more engaged in voting, which is to me all more power to him for that. And this time around, it's a Republican, not a Democrat, that's kind of doing this. It'd be interesting. I would have liked to have seen, for example, Andrew Yang run again. I think that some of his ideas at the time needed to be vetted, but he certainly had, I think, some of the gatherings of like pretty coherent thoughts that actually probably could have prevailed our country to the future. And I do think that Vivek Ramaswamy kind of brings that outside of the box thinking. And plus, I mean, isn't that one of the big things that everyone kind of is harping on, specifically for this election, is we have two very old presidential candidates who, it's very, I mean, hate to go dark with it, but it's very realistic that one of them could just die of natural causes in office. Shouldn't we be having kind of that more, I don't know,
yeah.
JFK style younger guy that can usher us through maybe the AI revolution that we're about to have? I mean, that to me that would make more sense, but
Yeah, totally.
I guess we'll
I
see.
don't I don't know if Trump would die. I think he's on like speed or something and he'll that dude will
Probably.
that dude will never die.
Yeah, he's
Um
definitely seemingly healthier than what we've seen. I don't know, Joe Biden
yeah,
on
yeah,
stage.
that was one thing that I thought I saw somebody tweet the other day. Somebody mentioned Biden's age and somebody quote who will say has a affiliation to or not affiliation, but definitely leans left and was like, "Well, Trump is also old." And I was like, "All right, yeah, he is." But
Old in different ways. Yeah,
clearly they're not the same
yeah.
um so
Like cognitively speaking,
yeah, yeah,
I
100%.
mean, it's
But
it's it's very difficult to watch anything that President Biden
yeah, man,
puts
it's
out.
like
I mean,
there's been
it's cringy. Yeah.
there's been two or three times recently where they just pull him off the stage because he just like isn't talking. And then Mitch McConnell as well
Oh my God. Yeah.
has had his
Same.
freezes. And what's interesting about
I
Vivek
don't, well, I don't know
specifically,
why that's a controversial thing to even say, for that matter. I mean, it's how are we like defying life where like, people do get old, people do, aren't able to keep up with things. I don't know why that statement ever is like a controversial thing. I think it's definitely the majority of people kind of can recognize it, I feel
yeah,
like.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think when it first started happening, like 3, 4 years ago,
Hmm.
um, people would say, "Oh, it's just a cheap like hit because you wanted Trump to win, like somebody wanted Trump to win, yada yada." But like
Sure.
the evidence at this point is undeniable. Like
Yeah,
there's something
absolutely.
wrong for sure, and
Yeah.
and just and just yeah, like I don't want the leader of the place that I live to be that way. Like
Right.
that doesn't fill me with confidence that this dude would go into a negotiation with some other leader and this is the guy that's doing the talking. Like what is he signing that is getting us into trouble that he doesn't know that he's signing type situation.
Sure.
Um
Yeah. It's sorry I interrupted you. You were going to ask something about Vivek.
yeah. So the thing with Vivek in the podcast, what I was getting at is like the Nikki Haley's and the Tim Scotts of the world and these politician people aren't really they're staying in this in the we'll say legacy media format.
Hmm.
And I have heard nothing of any substance from any of them except for Vivek. And and that worries me from the standpoint of I would like to know what somebody's fully formed out thoughts are. Like you can just
Sure.
yell on a debate stage, I think we should close the border. It's like, all right, how? Right? Nobody's given that sort of thing, at least that I've seen. I've not gone and done extensive research on this stuff. But the point
Hmm.
being is that I haven't, and obviously I'm not saying this as like lots of people listen to podcasts now rather than the
Hmm.
news. And the forum to go on to a long form conversation with somebody and fully like flesh out an idea and say like this is how I'm planning to do it. I've got XYZ resources allocated to this and we're going to pull this over here and we're going
Hmm.
to do this and that. Like and RFK is the other one that I've heard super long form.
Yeah, he's
Um
the only one that's doing it. Yeah.
yeah,
It would be crazy to see like, well, both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Like, imagine if they had these long form
Trump has done it.
podcast. Has well, I guess he did it with Tucker Carlson. I mean,
Well, he
I heard rumors that he was going to do it with Joe Rogan too.
so he did it with you know who the Nelk Boys are?
No, I'm not familiar.
So he did it with them. I don't know, I don't know how they ended up where they are. Like, I don't know what their background is, but they've had Mark
Sure.
Cuban on their
Oh
podcast,
wow.
and like
Okay.
they had Trump on, and I listened to all of that.
Hmm.
YouTube took it down like a day after it was posted, but I found it
Hmm.
on some like found clips of it somewhere else. So he's done it for sure.
Hmm.
Not as much as Vivek and RFK have, of course, um, but he's done it
Well, you
as
have to
well.
also think that the RFK and the Viveks of the world have to stand out in some different way. Yeah, but I also kind of think that they're more trendy. You know, and to your point, I think a lot of our the candidates that we see, um, you know, you're talking about maybe Boomer generation and Gen X, where they just don't necessarily see the world in the same viewpoint as someone that might have been a millennial. And that's not a slight on them. That's just a, you know, we kind of grew up with maybe the dawning of the internet, and basically much of our adult lives have been encompassed by social media and the internet and so on and so forth, whereas they didn't really have that. And so to
No.
think in that way, it takes, it's a skill. I mean, and it
Hmm.
obviously, you can teach an old dog new tricks for sure, but this sort of way we've been doing it for so long, it clearly it's not really at a point where it's warrant or it's working really anymore. I mean, you think about it. There was just a recent poll. I was watching the news article video earlier, and they were talking about how everyone's, you know, they believe that the country's so divided. Well, yeah, I mean, it is. And it just seems as if our current elected, you know, or at least the plurality of our current elected officials are not really either paying attention to that, or if they are, they don't, you know, they certainly don't show that they are. They haven't really done anything different to distinguish themselves from what would have been done. And like, if you're just kind of keeping going on business as usual down this road that leads to nowhere, like what is that kind of saying for everybody else? I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
why there is, it's not even just a you know, a right or left thing. I mean, there are just a lot of people feeling disenfranchised. You might, you know, obviously a lot of people feeling disenfranchised for a lot of different reasons, but there hasn't really been any commonality that has drawn people closer. And frankly, some of these younger candidates that do exist in the political sphere are kind of bringing that new flavor. I mean, I think the last time we maybe talked, I had mentioned Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez as being one of the younger people from the millennial generation that I was kind of actually, even though I'm on the right and she's on the left, I was kind of looking up to that sort of, hey, there's someone actually leading from our generation, and it's less of a common thing than it should be. I mean, I really think that the baton should have been passed to us at some point, or at least in this next decade, definitely should be passed to us. And
Yeah.
Vivek is that person that
I feel
could be
like
helping lead that charge.
there's an age group that was kind of skipped. Like you look at
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of, we'll say, like 65, 70 plus people who are in
Mm-hmm.
Congress, and then I don't really see like that many prominent, I'll say prominent because I haven't gone down the list of like ages of all these people, but I don't see that
Mm-hmm.
many prominent like early to mid 40s
Mm-hmm.
type age range. Um and
Well,
one
you
o-
also have to think about that. I mean, it's and coming from someone that was able to run just on a local level. I mean, I guess you would maybe consider DC. We do have a congresswoman, or delegate to Congress. So DC, I guess you could say it has its own congressional district, even though we unfortunately don't get a vote in Congress. But in terms of like the sprawl of people, I think there's 700,000 plus people in Washington D.C. proper. So you think of a congressional district that's on par almost. Um, and it just seems like that being the case, the sorry, I was going somewhere with that and I
no, you're
completely
good.
forgot.
You're good. What I was getting at is like the Tulsi Gabbards and the Dan Crenshaws who
Mhm.
fit in that age. Like
Oh,
I
right.
don't know if
Yeah.
Dan Crenshaw is still, I think he's still in Congress, but like Tulsi's been pushed out, and some of these people who were kind of on the rise in that age range have been pushed out or moved out. Like even AOC to a certain extent, like she had a very
Hmm.
quick rise, and then all of a sudden it's been just like tamped down on kind of what she's. I think part of that is some of her policies and other, I'll call it off the field things.
Hmm.
Um, but you look at the people in the age range that kind of been pushed out, and the people who are still there are Mitch McConnell, Pelosi, Biden, right? Like Mike Pence is still running around, like these sorts of people. And at the debate last night, I think based on what I heard, Vivek took most of the heat. Um,
Hmm.
and
Well,
that
he's
to
also
me,
one of the front runners. I mean,
well, but so
yeah,
is DeSantis, and so is
yeah.
like DeSantis, at least in the first one, kind of stayed under the radar a little bit. Like he didn't catch a lot.
Hmm.
Vivek caught a lot,
Hmm.
and that's the thing that's interesting to me about the whole podcast thing. Like we're in, this is, you you can say like every election is a transition election, but like this one feels more so than the last one maybe, or even the one before, just based on how humans do business, right? Like, and the thing with the podcasting versus the, or like the long form versus the quick snippets is it's a thorough actual examination of somebody's policies. Like you have to
Hmm.
be actually thought out and prepared to really defend what you're doing for, or in a 2 hour conversation. You can't do
Hmm.
talking points for two. I mean, you can do talking points for 2 hours, but then it turns into
Well, actually, notice
nonsense.
how a lot of their talking points are, here's a question about education. All right, here's my 10-second clip of
Hmm.
education, and then I'm going to pivot to talk about what I want to talk about for the next minute, 30 seconds, or whatever it
Right.
is.
Right.
So notice, I think Nikki Haley did it. She was like, yeah, we need to protect the border, but I want to talk about China. It's like she pivoted right there. It's like, okay, well, so we didn't actually get you to answer anything about the border. You instead wanted to talk about China, and later on, she wanted to talk about TikTok and stuff like that.
Long
So
form doesn't let
it's
you do that.
it,
With a
long
good
form.
host, long
Yeah,
form, you cannot do that long form.
yeah,
And that's
exactly.
why people who aren't going on, like, we're going to be in, I think probably 2028
Hmm.
is going to be the first election cycle where everyone is trying to go long form, or at least like if you're not going long form in 2028, I think you're not going to have a chance.
Hmm.
Like this election's, because I don't like I don't see, well, Biden obviously, if he wins in 24 wouldn't be able to run in 28 obviously, but I don't, none of these other guys, Pence, DeSantis, like that's going to be it. Like after they're done, like RFK is a little bit older, but dude is
Well,
he's still strong.
I think DeSantis probably has another run in him. And a lot of people are even saying that he probably should have waited until 28 in the first place.
Did you see what Newsom said about him?
Well, they're having their own kind of sanctioned debate on Fox, which is an interesting
Yes.
thing. And actually, that's what the murmurings are: is that somehow, some way. I mean, if you look at the Vegas voting pool or the most recent what is it when Vegas has their bets?
Yeah, the
Um,
odds.
yeah, the odds. They have a Newsom I think ahead of Kamala Harris. So
Well, that's not surprising because nobody likes her.
well, I get it, but I mean, but he's encroaching on Joe Biden. I think that it's you know realistic to say that Joe Biden might not even get to election time.
So I've got thoughts on that actually. So last night, somebody Newsom was doing an interview with somebody. I forgot who it
Hmm.
was, but basically the guy asked him about his debate with DeSantis, and Newsom was like, I don't even know why DeSantis is debating with me. Like that doesn't make any sense to him. He seems distracted, not the person that you would want leading the country. He seems unqualified, and like he makes this point where it's like completely unravels DeSantis' whole campaign.
Hmm.
He said, I think DeSantis got caught up in his own hype and listened to his consultants, and I think he regrets running and he just tears him down. And I was like, ooh,
Hmm.
damn. So like,
Yeah.
so of course they're having their own debate. Um, I don't I don't really understand that, to be honest, from DeSantis' side. Newsom is kind of the analogy that I heard used for Newsom is like he's the backup quarterback, so he's waiting if something happens to Biden and like he needs to
Sure.
go. So he's doing the debate, he's staying sharp, he's staying relevant, right? He's been at all these places and but he's not running.
Yeah.
It's kind of like why are you doing
Well,
this?
not running yet. I mean, I think
Well, exactly. So
yeah.
he's got to stay
Um,
warmed up, right?
and he certainly would fit the bill as being maybe a more younger, vibrant person. But that was the point that I wanted to make earlier when I was talking about having run before is probably one of the major reasons why we do see kind of maybe the more of an older generation in the House and Senate and just elected officials in general is because of the time commitment. I mean, if you have a full-time job or kids or any number of things that you're doing while you're at working age, it's very difficult to get out and also kind of have another full-time job that is being a candidate and having to make donor calls and door knock and get people to coalesce around you. So that's why I think we don't really see a lot of people in their 30s and 40s in political office because you're almost having to take like a year or two off of work to even get to the point where you can be to win. And that's not even to say that you're going to end up winning. I mean, I remember meeting one congresswoman from Iowa that she said that she had run 4 times before she'd won. Think about that. 4 times, that's a lot of hours to put into something that
Yeah,
you
that's
don't really
like
see the
eight
payoff.
years. It's like eight
Yeah,
years of your life.
it is, and it's not to say that her policies necessarily have changed. Or I mean, they probably did over those 8 years, but I mean, from when she started to when she actually won, I mean, she probably was much of the same human being to actually have be able to win, and she probably
Yeah.
compounds on what she was doing. The other thing that I wanted to just bring up real quick about Vivek is it does seem that with these long form and it's probably a good skill to have with these long form conversations or debates is that some of his ideas and he has some out there ideas. I know one of them is talking about the people should have to pass like a basic sort of litmus test to vote, so they can at least have a
Yeah.
educated understanding of what's going on. And he got a lot of flack for that, but the cool thing about having a long form debate is he's actually able to explain his perspective on it and maybe come to an agreement in the middle somewhere, as opposed to someone just attacking him and saying nope, you're done, on stage or something like that. So
Yeah.
I think that he held himself, because you're right, a lot of people were attacking him. He was really the focal point of everyone's attacks, except for maybe Nikki Haley with Tim Scott. And I think he held himself pretty well at this most recent debate.
He's been doing better than I thought he would. I think
Yeah.
Nikki Haley said, I feel dumber every time you talk to him, which is bonkers because like
I think
One,
he's arguably one of the more intelligent ones on
he
the stage.
probably is the smartest. He probably is
Yeah.
the smartest one or close to it for sure. And like I'm sitting there like why would you say that, right? Because well, I know why they say it, but it's like what are we doing? It's like these are the people that are supposed to be
Mhm.
running for president and you're literally calling somebody else dumb. Like that's an
Well,
insult that I used when I was in fifth grade. Like
sure.
it's
Well,
like what are you guys doing?
she also she called him dumb after she accused him of using TikTok to a comment that he says people should not be using social media at all. You know,
Yeah.
and you know that was a big thing. I don't know if you ever watched that Netflix documentary, the Social Network, where they were talking about how social media is kind of an addiction.
Hmm.
So he's on stage and people shouldn't have social media until they're 16 years old or something like that. And
Yeah.
then she goes and has the audacity to not listen to what he just said and call him dumb for saying something that she just like conjured up. It was a
Yeah.
I don't think that it was the win that she was maybe looking to have. I think that was actually made her look a little bit more foolish. And I like Nikki Haley. I think that she, she fits the bill pretty well, but I don't think that that was a good look on her.
No, I think she was trying to get at that TikTok has ties to China and he shouldn't be using
Sure,
it for campaigning and
sure,
blah blah blah. But even so, like it didn't come off that way. Like nobody, like you and I are talking that was a dumb thing of her to say. Um,
yeah. Like she
rather
thought she
than
owned him, and it's like, no, you kind of owned
yeah.
yourself.
And but he's been quite impressive to be honest with the weight of some of these people.
Mhm.
I do think Pence is kind of toast after this. Like I don't think he did that well in the first one, and I think he's kind of fallen off after this one as well.
I'm surprised that Christie has been Chris Christie has been around this long. I mean, he kind of had a couple foolish moments himself with the whole Donald Duck comment that kind of didn't really land. I don't know if you saw that one.
That was bad. I
Yeah,
think, but you know
but
what's
he's
weird?
the only one that's attacking Donald Trump seemingly,
Well, I
and
think that's why he's there, to be honest, because I don't think anyone is actually taking him seriously, if that makes
yeah,
sense. Like I think
no,
he's got the polling of the anyone but Trump people, and so his
hmm,
numbers are staying high enough that he stays on stage. Nobody else is really like, at least from the first debate and the clips I saw from the second one, none of the other people are like it's like he's not there.
hmm,
It's like they go down the list of like, oh, what do you think you should or what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then they get to Christie and Christie's like Trump is bad, and then they just move on.
sure.
It's
Well, what's really weird, and I'm surprised it hasn't even been brought up, or at least to my knowledge. Maybe I'm missing something, but the fact that none of the candidates really, and maybe the first debate they talked about it a little bit, but seemingly none of the candidates really have the audacity to like talk about the kind of political persecution that we're witnessing in like historic daylight, where one party is persecuting the essentially the de facto leader of another political opponent. I mean,
Vivek
it's
did.
oh, did okay, well
Yeah, in the
then
first one, he was
yeah.
like, if I'm elected, I'm pardoning Trump, and I was like,
Okay,
yo,
okay. Well,
I was
but
like, yo, that's wild.
even that doesn't really unpack like what's historically happening right now
Yeah,
that we like. Yeah, I was reading this one book where they were talking about you don't realize you're in history until it's history, right? Like
yeah,
you think that it's just run of the mill, and then like you look back 10 years like, oh my God, that was crazy time. And I think that historians 30, 40 years from now are going to look back at this time as obviously everything's documented, and they'll be like this is when things started to really change, like 2016 and on is when things really started to unravel. And
yeah. I hope
luckily
it doesn't
we're
then.
millennials and we'll live through it, and we'll be able to say what we'll be like the old grandparents to our grandchildren, saying, oh yeah, I remember that time back in the day.
Yeah, yeah. No, for sure. And I hope it doesn't. And I was recording a podcast this morning and from a guy from with a guy from Wales, and I was
Mm,
asking him like from your perspective over in Europe, like how do you look at the US? And he only had good things to say. And one of the things that we were talking about was like the people still want to come to America for the American dream. Like it's not like
mm,
that's shifted. So I still think there's some level of optimism. I would say cautious optimism that I have because I think that you can tie right? The people that are here, like the individuals that are here, I think are
Mhm.
still the most innovative. I think like the most driven, the most independent, the most like all these things. And people say, oh, like America's becoming soft. It's like, well, maybe in some sense, but I still feel like the rest of it, I still feel like we're good to a certain extent. And to go back to your point about campaigning being a full-time job, the state of the country being like in decline, the amount of money that it takes to actually run a campaign. Did you do any research before you ran on like how much it used to cost to run? Because I feel like
No, I probably should
50 years,
have.
I feel like 50 years ago, you didn't really have to do that. Like you didn't have to be a millionaire to run for Congress in your district. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, that's, I mean, well, I mean, the history of voting is actually kind of an interesting sort of history. Like you can go back to the original, like, when George Washington became president, and see kind of how that sort of election took place. And it was very, very like closed door. It was fairly obvious that he was probably going to be the president. And it was a big old club, and they kind of all worked together with it. But it wasn't until, like, I think it was I want to say John Tyler, and I think William Henry Harrison, when they had the little ditty like "Tip a Canoe" and Tyler too.
Nine. Yeah, yeah. I think it was
You know,
the ninth president. Yeah, I think
yeah,
so. And then he died like a month later,
well, yeah,
something like
he
that.
died, but it wasn't until like around that time when they really started like campaigning. I remember
Interesting.
I think it was the presidential podcast that the Washington Post was doing, and they had talked about like James Monroe. I want to say it was either James Madison or James Monroe. It might have been James Monroe, um, where like people didn't even know what he looked like. He was running. I mean, obviously the people that he was working with knew what he looked like, but for people who were voting, he was people didn't, or he was one of the first. They didn't know what he looked like, so he was one of the first people to like parade around on a horse or something like that.
Hmm.
And then
Yeah.
you get to where we are now, where it's millions and millions and millions of dollars, and a lot of money is pumped into it. And you have the donor class that kind of wants their policies enacted and whatnot. Um, so no, I didn't research that maybe before my campaign. I just kind of
Yeah.
went to go.
I don't think it's a prerequisite for running, but it would be interesting to know.
Well, there was that guy in, I think it was New Jersey, that like got to like almost won, or either he won or almost won a campaign and he only spent like $50 or something like that. That was like
Really
recently, like within the last decade. I think it was a big kind of news story. I don't think he won, but yeah, that did happen. So I mean,
interesting.
and take you know, again, I don't want to keep harping on AOC, but what she did was fairly impressive in her district, where she just knocked on a lot of doors and was able to kind of beat an incumbent that was not really doing any campaigning. So she kind of
Yeah.
won in a district that he just assumed that he was going to win re-election. So
Yeah.
that type of stuff happens too.
Well, that's when you get kind of complacent like that, you go about business as usual. You mentioned the donor class. Like the reason why stuff hasn't changed is because business as usual is working for the people
Mhm.
who are there. So like
Well,
what they don't have reason to change.
the one thing that's kind of crazy though about how quickly Congress, and I mean, I guess it's designed this way for a reason, but it took me an entire year running with a team of people, and doing all the stuff running for DC Council. But then you take what Congress does. I think they have elections every 2 years. So you're saying that they
Congress,
have to
yeah, yeah.
spend, you're saying that they're kind of, I mean, unless you're an incumbent, maybe, I mean, you're still working 6 months out of the year on your reelection at minimum. I mean, probably a year, you're probably thinking about a year out. So that's really like you're only getting 1 year of work done. It's kind of amazing how some of these people have the energy to keep that sort of
Yeah.
system going. It's
Well,
peaks and valleys, I guess.
I think they take advantage of an uninformed population. Like
Or bid,
wasn't
yeah, yeah.
wasn't there some quote that was like an informed populace is the greatest enemy of the state or something like that? I feel like that was a quote.
That
It sounds
sounds
like
that
it sounds
sounds
like a
quote
quote.
worthy.
Hold on.
It
Here
sounds quote worthy.
we talked about this before. I'm Googling it. Anyway.
Yeah.
But anyways, like an informed populace quote. Um I don't know. There's a few. Let's see. I think this is the one.
Well, I know that there's an
Uh, an
Isaac
e-
Asimov quote talking about democracy.
that,
Um,
an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people. I think it was Thomas Jefferson.
so that's almost saying the opposite of what you're saying. That's saying that we should be educated.
Should be, yeah.
Yeah.
I was saying that the Congress people now are taking advantage that the citizens are not as informed as maybe they should be.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, but yeah, also when that policy was enacted, like I think the world moved a lot slower then. It's like a year's worth of work in 1787 was a lot more, like a lot, like not more, but
You
it
know,
time moved slower. Like things go so fast now that it like a year goes by like that, and then
sure, but that's kind of an interesting concept to think about because I would almost say that it almost seems like the the time frame back then things happen quicker, like through going through Congress and the Senate. Like it almost seems as if, um, you know, the right and the left, or the Whig Party and the Republicans, or the Democrats, and the it almost seems like they had to work together. Maybe because they didn't have distractions, they had to work together, and so we saw. I mean, when was the last time we had like a new amendment? You know,
well,
I guess the
I hope we don't have one for a while. I don't know
well,
when the last one
sure,
was.
but it took them what 8 years to build the Constitution, give or take, and then they still had to convince people with the Federalist Papers. But then, you like how long do you think it would take us in today's climate to even revise the Constitution? Not saying that we
Impossible.
should. Yeah, I
Impossible.
mean, exactly. It would take us so long. I mean, thank God for AI, because that's probably the only way that we're actually going to be able to do something like that is having Chat GPT just build us
Yeah.
a new decorum.
Well, I think bills back then also were not 4,000 pages of like,
Well, that's
oh,
true too. Yeah,
add in $1 million here for my district and I'll vote for it, and add in 2 million for my district, like pork barrels, or what is it, pork barrel spending? Is that what it's called?
yeah.
Um, like I don't know, man. Like so I saw a tweet. Um, so when this goes out, we will know if the government shut down or not. But as of now, it's
Mm,
looking like it will be. I saw a tweet um from a senator from Iowa, maybe. I don't
mm.
remember, but it was like somebody's putting it's like we are expected to vote on a 4,000 page bill that we haven't seen yet in 1 hour
Oh, yeah.
to do a stopgap. And I was like, you're gonna give these
Yeah.
people an hour to read 4,000 pages and then vote on it. It's like,
Well, that seems to be the crux of what the government shut down. I think Matt Gaetz and the and what they call themselves, the Freedom Caucus,
yeah,
is they're the ones seemingly trying to hold the government hostage to get back to a point of voting on basically one topic bill, so you can actually vet them and go through them and whatnot, as opposed to these huge omnibuses that we've been kind of known for. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. I think that works. But what sucks is that here we are at the umpteenth hour getting ready for a government shutdown. Now they're kind of complaining about it. I mean, and I guess we don't know what's going on the Senate or the House floor or the Senate floor. So maybe all year they've been trying to harp on this, and all year they've been kind of getting pushed along, which is probably the case. But that
I
seems
don't
to
know.
be kind of the argument.
I think they did it to themselves, honestly. I have very little sympathy for like you said, we don't know what's actually going on behind
Mhm.
closed doors, but the optics at least do not look good.
Oh,
Um,
sure. Yeah, you could argue that. That's for
yeah.
sure.
And so when you talk about passing of the baton, right, the optics, at least how it looks to me, is there's a lot of people that are more concerned with re-election in the donor class than they would be about like the people that
Hmm.
they represent. And I think a lot of people are realizing that. So when it seems like the country is divided, but really I think if you were to ask most people like what's your biggest issue regardless of political affiliation, I feel like most people would say I feel like the government doesn't care about me. Is that a fair thing to say?
In so many ways. I mean, doesn't care is kind of a very open-ended way of, I mean, doesn't care about my health care, doesn't care about the economy, doesn't care about,
Or some
the
like
our tax dollars. I mean,
some
I
variation
definitely
of
people probably don't believe that we spend our tax dollars appropriately. I mean, I think I
yeah.
just saw an article talking about how, I don't know where you stand on what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, but I know a lot of people are very upset with the fact that our tax dollars are going to spend on like their infrastructure and their I think it's like their salaries and whatnot is
Yep.
what I just recently saw. And
Hmm.
so that's something that, it's one thing to finance like a war effort that, has some merit. But it's another thing to say, oh, well, we can't even take care of our own farmers and businessmen and the economy, but we could take care of theirs. Like I think the optics of that look pretty bad.
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting at is like
You
regardless of
know,
political affiliation, I think a lot of people would have some sort of sentiment where and then pick the example that you want to use, whether it's
sure,
the one that you
sure.
just used or healthcare or any of these, but it's something where
Well,
it's
we're
like,
seeing it right now in New York with the migrant crisis. All the migrants are getting
yeah,
bused from the border to New York, and
what's going on with that? Because I heard some rumblings about that, and I saw a clip from Eric Adams, who's the mayor of New York City, say like we're not going to be able to like we as in New York is not going to be able to handle it. But what's going on with that?
well, I mean, to my knowledge, it's Greg Abbott from Texas has been busing or somehow shipping a bunch of migrants that have been crossing the southern borders and sending them to the various sanctuary cities around the country that don't really have to deal with the problem firsthand. And they're starting to realize that the problem exists, and you know, I guess they were kind of living the good life, not having to worry about it, whereas Texas constantly has to worry about it. And it's what's funny is instead of like, I don't know, saying, "Oh wow, we realize this is a big problem. Maybe let's help out Texas and figure this out together as a united country." Instead, they just double down and say, "Well, Texas is bad for doing this. Ignorance is bliss for us." That's what it sounds like. I mean, maybe someone can prove me wrong, and I hope they could, because I would love to be educated about it. But um, again,
I don't
from
know.
the outsider looking in, it seems like this is the cry for help that Texas has been looking for, and everyone else is just kind of either blaming Texas or getting, giving them the cold shoulder when they're realizing that this is a real problem. And notice how it's been a problem in our debates. I mean, um, immigration is not going anywhere anytime soon, and of course we absolutely want to have immigrants in the country. I mean, that's one way to keep the country thriving and growing, and I mean we renowned ourselves to be a melting pot, and we have adherence to all these different cultures. However, I think whenever you open the floodgates, you're going to have problems there, and it's harder to track people. It's harder to find people housing and get people jobs, and I mean the whole thing just it makes it more difficult.
Yeah,
You know.
I heard one story in New York City where there's it's like this apartment structure type deal, and half of it I think was a nursing home or like borderline nursing home. There's a lot of old people
Mhm.
there, and because they had got funding from the government told them to kick everyone out, and they were going to use it as a
Mm.
homeless slash immigrant shelter. So there's some like 95-year-old
Well,
veteran
so
that they just booted out, and they're like, yeah, sorry, dude.
I know that they were talking about this up in Chicago as well, and again, for the greater part of last year, I was dealing with primarily DC problems, and certainly we had the same problem that maybe New York and Chicago was having, but I don't know if we were having it to the full extent that they were having it. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, be wary of the singled out kind of talking points that some of these medias wants wants to kind of portray. I mean, I'm sure the problem is pretty bad, and obviously when you're hearing it from the mayor, the governor themselves, like, then probably it's pretty bad. But you know, I just don't want to take anything as like an anecdotal evidence of
No, no,
something
no,
happening
of
that's
course.
not happening. Um, but you're right. Mayor Adams in New York, he did say like that they're not going to be able to finance this, and it's going to be very rough and yada yada yada. So, take him at his word, I guess, for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think yeah, I don't know. It's for sure going to be a difficult, I'll say definitely 18 months, like going into
Hmm.
until next January, right? Because we're going to see problems like this ramp up the Trump sort of political persecution train,
Oh yeah.
whether or not you like him or not.
I think
It's
that if anyone thinks that this next year is going to be hunky dory, rainbows and butterflies, like you got another thing coming. Like
no, yeah,
I dread uh you know January 25 when inauguration happens, no matter who wins. I mean, heck, if I don't see another January 6th esque kind of ordeal not happening despite whichever political candidate wins. I mean, if Biden wins, I think that there's going to be riots. If Trump wins, there's definitely going to be riots. I mean, if and maybe the best alternative would be someone like a Nikki Haley that can bring the company or the country together. Uh, but as of right now, who knows? And I
yeah.
mean, did you see what happened recently up in Philadelphia with the looting or the robberies and looting of the Apple Store and Lululemon and so on? Did you see that
I
recently?
saw that it happened, but I didn't see why or anything past. I just saw a headline that it happened.
Well, I mean, I mean, those are pretty reputable stores, Apple and Lululemon,
Yeah,
and I think they said it was upwards of 100 looters going around. Um, I kind of think that that's going to be the norm coming into the election cycle, and it's I don't know. I mean, I guess just be wary, be prepared.
yeah. I think the
Don't
best piece of kind
be
of
safe,
info will be safe. I think be diligent both with the
be
information
diligent. Yeah.
that you are consuming and vetting, and then also with your physical safety, of course. But I think
Hmm.
both pieces are going to be super important as people try and push various narratives and all this stuff is like important
Well,
to
because it's like every single election that's happened has been the election of our generation, the election of the lifetime. I mean, obviously, uh, a lot of people say that, oh, Joe Biden didn't actually win. Trump just lost. It wasn't like people were, eager to vote for Joe Biden. They were just eager to vote away Donald Trump.
yeah
Um, and I think that there are so many people that kind of live with this fear of like, oh my God, this election is going to be the end of us. If we don't go out and vote, then they're going to take away our rights. And yeah, it's like, well, first of all, none of that's going to happen. I mean, we've come too far as a country. But even if it did happen, you got to admit that we're in unprecedented times to begin with. Like, it's not like you could just sort of have it both ways,
yeah
and that was what was interesting about this poll that I recently saw was that like some 80% of the country kind of basically views the other side as the problems. Like if it wasn't for the other side, that we'd be all good to go, but it's because of the other side that we're not good to go. It's like, Jesus, that's a
yeah
tough way to it's a tough way to
that's
look at your brothers and sisters.
That's not good. That's not good for sure. That's like the one thing that we gotta fix. As I think if people generally just some empathy, right? Like you don't have to agree with everybody, but like you got to understand that people view things the way they do for a reason. Like I said,
Mhm.
and rather than just yelling at them, trying to figure out what the reason is, right? And this is why the long form stuff is really good because you actually figure out why people think certain way and then you can say, oh well, I like that part of that idea and maybe let's
Mhm.
change this, or I would change this part, but like I don't hate the guy because he has America's best interests at heart, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the thing that I think is missing a lot. And I I really wish, like, without risking coming off as why don't we all get along, um I wish it were more that way because I don't
Well,
like people. I do
yeah.
people like people don't like being in conflict all the time. At least I feel that way that people
Yeah.
don't like
Well,
it.
so some people that's their job, right? I mean, they
Well,
get
that's
they
true.
get financed to be, you know, protesters and whatnot. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
business is booming. I mean,
this is booming. Shh, we'll get
um,
taken off YouTube. Although nobody's probably listening by this point. This is fine. Um,
But no, I think that empathy is certainly a very important point, but I also think compromise.
yes.
Um, you know, everyone wants everything, but no one wants to give up anything. It's like,
Yep.
you know, it, like I would love to see something like abortion handled in our lifetime and just like have people just have a compromise there and just like I not to say that it's not an important thing or anything, but like to me it's not one of my like important. I mean, maybe for
Yeah.
obvious reasons. I don't really have much to do with it, but it's you know, I think that there's so many bigger fish to fry than some of the problems that we keep facing that are like, come on, guys, can we just figure this? Like this one seems like it's easy compared to these other issues that we're having to deal with. Like, can't we just figure that out?
Yeah.
Can't we just compromise? I mean, I guess they did compromise with the one of the few pieces of good news I've seen recently was I guess they made the dress code for the Senate, like they made an act and they voted in favor of it, because I don't know if you saw that they were trying to say, oh, we're gonna be more lackadaisical on the dress code, so Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania is able to wear his shorts and hoodies, and I guess everyone was like, nope, we're not going to do that. That's no, you have to respect respect the office, at least
Yeah.
on the
Well,
floor.
that's nice of them. I'm glad they're doing something for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I think, yeah, I feel like, how about this? Because I feel we had a whole nother topic to get on, but we went an hour on this one, which is great.
It's fun,
So,
yeah. There's a lot
so
to talk about with it too.
yes, 100%. So we'll get you on again to talk about the campaign stuff and the more nitty-gritty, like how to run a campaign, how you ran yours, things that you learned. But I do have a question from previous guest that I will pull up now, and that question is, what is something that is hidden or behind the scenes about you that contributes to your success in your field? So in other words, what is something that maybe you experienced in childhood or a hidden sort of personality trait that allows you to be successful in the things that you're doing now, like something that isn't um like if you ask somebody who just met you, like, or if I ask somebody who just met you, oh, what do you think about Giuseppe, and they'd list off like the first three things that everyone says, what's something like under the hood that helps you
Mm.
and contributes to your success?
You know, that's a pretty good question. I think one thing that kind of sometimes my wife laughs at me about it, but c'est la vie, is I got really into during COVID. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, growing up, how do I want to preface this? Growing up, I always, I did my required reading for school and everything, and I was more gravitated towards math and whatnot, and hence being an engineer graduating college. Um, but one of the things I always kind of was envious of friends of mine was their ability to what seemed to be they would read quicker than I, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they just happened to notice them with a book one time, and then I just had this idea that, oh, they're reading books and I'm not. So over COVID, one of my kind of goals, and this happened only a handful of years ago, was I finally got it's called Libby. It's a library app where you can get your library card and go and rent audiobooks essentially. And so I got this app and I started just picking up anything and everything that was available. And DC has some good books. I being in the Navy Reserve, I was able to use my Navy Reserve library card, so that opens up another kind of swath of books. But I got really into listening to audiobooks, and I would be able to go throughout my day, especially during COVID when there wasn't really much more to do. I was listening to almost a book a day. Sometimes it was maybe a shorter book or a book a week. I mean, and so I started really opening up different things that I otherwise would have never have gotten into, or even taken a chance on. So for example, a lot of people maybe in my circles might laugh at me, but I think it still was a good book. Was like this was around the time, maybe give or take, where that book White Fragility was kind of making its rounds and people were criticizing it and yada yada yada. Well, I mean, I did listen to it, but I think prior to being able to listen to it and have the option to listen to it, I probably would have never even opened it or bought it or picked it up or anything. And so the ability to kind of re-engage my life with listening to audiobooks or podcasts for that matter, but specifically with these books, has opened up a lot of my mindset in the way I view things. It's also allowed me to be interested in different topics that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to dabble in. Politics maybe being one of them, but history kind of was something that I started getting more into. And coupling that with the ability to I've always maybe been a pretty neat and tidy person, clean person, but what I found a hobby that I never really knew that I liked was finding the audiobook or finding the podcast or whatever. And I could never listen to anything single speed anymore because I think I talk fast and I somehow I've been able to train myself to comprehend listening at like I don't know what it necessarily means, but at a 2.0 like reading speed or double speed, my books, which
Hmm.
I don't know if that's uncommon, but it might sound a little bit quicker when I'm playing it on the radio or something like that. Like people might think it's crazy. It definitely does sound sped up, but when you start getting really into focus and flow state, for me that's my jam. I could really roll with it, and I'll go and clean the entire house and listen to 4 hours worth of a book. And not only did I learn something for 4 hours, but my house is clean, and I've been able to kind of find ways to layer, so I realized that you can't really multitask, because multitasking involves you like being able to do a topic here and then do a topic there and do that. And that's not really good. I think in the book, Thinking Fast and Slow was that was, it really showed that you really can't do that. But what I have been able to do is what I guess would be referred to as layering. So like I'm focused on listening to my audiobook, but I'm kind of doing very mundane, caveman like, tasks such as cleaning dishes or taking out the trash or even walking the dog. Like the task is I'm listening to my book. I just so happen to be in autopilot when I'm cleaning the house kind of thing. And so that's how I'm able to maybe do two things at once. I mean, I find that once I start doing anything a little bit more um, in depth where I have to think about it, then I can't really do both. But for the most part, if I could just kind of go into autopilot and listen to my both, and listen to my book, it's like a win-win. So that's something that is an extreme hobby of mine that maybe in the last 5 years or so, or I guess really since COVID, so 2020
Hmm.
is something that I think has immensely helped my life.
Yeah, sounds like it. I'm similar. I do the same thing, autopilot while listening to a podcast or whatever.
Yeah,
It's also wild that you said uh 5 years ago, start of COVID, and then actually it's 3.5 at this point, which is
yeah, yeah.
kind of crazy. Like it feels like not that long ago.
I know.
Um, yeah,
But
man.
it was that year that I formed that habit, and
Yeah.
it's and to be fair, it did take me some challenge or some duration of time to get to a point where I could comprehend a double sped book. Um, like I remember I tried to listen to like a Henry Kissinger book, and
Oh,
I just
that's
couldn't
too much.
comprehend
That's
it.
too much info.
It
That's
was
too
it was
much
like
info to go 2 speed.
it was so much info, and like the topic was about like the Middle East, and it was very interesting. But like he was just rattling off all these different names, all these different kind of sects of the Middle Eastern cultures, and it was very difficult to keep up with. But as I got better at it, I mean, it was a skill that I can see like where I started and where I'm at now. Like, and I I really can get through most books in a day or two, if I
Yeah.
really kind of put my mind to it. I mean, and to me, that's a fantastic habit because I do think that again, tying this back into our first point of the conversation, is listening to something long form and not really being able to interject and just kind of listen to what their talking points are. Certainly humbles you and helps you kind of say, okay, well, I see how you went from start to finish. I see what you're talking about. I agree with some of it. I disagree with some of it, and move on. And so that's something that I kind of actually been wanting to maybe do is almost do like take this skill that I've kind of learned and do like mini book reports on some of these books that I've been listening uh, to then be able to go back and reference, like, these are the top 3 takeaways that I thought, oh yeah, that was an aha moment. That was a eureka moment or whatever. That was when the light bulb went off, and just be able to reference that. So,
Yeah.
because like when you read a book, I mean, you're not going to conjure up every single line or chapter of that book. I mean, you're going to remember the things that stand out to you, you
Hmm.
know. And so I think that, yeah, that's what I maybe, to take that the step further, is what I maybe want to do.
Yeah.
And I even have like a little on my desk here. I have a little journal that just a small book, whatever, that I have been kind of starting to sit there and actually take notes on some of the things I think are interesting. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great answer. Um, any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Um,
Or
well,
anything to plug?
it is it was great to chat with you again, and I do
Yeah.
apologize that we kind of got carried away on
No, no,
some of the
no. It's
debate
all
stuff.
good. It's all good. That just means you have to come back. So
Yeah, I think by January, December timeframe, I am looking to probably not run for election this cycle, just because I want to kind of get involved in maybe the delegate process for Washington D.C. But specifically, I also want to kind of take some of the lessons learned from my campaign and kind of pay it forward a little bit and be like a campaign manager or a treasurer even for someone else's campaign, to kind of teach them sort of where I went wrong, so they don't make the same mistakes, but also kind of say, well, hey, we could have done this better or different or whatever, and maybe it could apply, to someone else's campaign. Maybe they can, reach further than what I reached, and then we kind of can start getting the piggyback of, like, we got this far, you get that far, you get this far, and then eventually maybe win.
yeah, Giuseppe for president 2040 question mark.
Hey, someone's got to step up, Maybe by then DC becomes a state and I could, say I was, I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, fair enough. All right, guys. Yeah, stay tuned for the next one with Giuseppe. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Thank you.